Hey guys, it's been a while since I talked about the AR9. It's hard to remember where exactly we left off, but I think since the last time I made a video about my AR9 build, it's been through a couple of revisions and is actually working reasonably well right now, which isn't saying much, but then again, it's an AR9, so maybe it is saying something. Kind of the problem with AR9 builds is that the AR9 platform is not really as well established as the AR15, maybe not even as well as the AR10 or DPMS LR308. So all AR9 builds end up being mongrels with parts from up to maybe a dozen different manufacturers. In order to really put a fork in this one, I wanted to get a complete factory AR9 where all the parts are made by the same manufacturer and designed to actually work together. So I got an Aero Precision EPC9. This is one of the only AR9 designs that is both somewhat modern but still basically just a traditional blowback AR9. There are more advanced designs like the Angstat Arms MDP or UDP, which has a roller delay system, and then there's also the CMMG Banshee with the radial delay blowback system. Both of those are getting a little bit farther away from traditional AR9 pattern. They also cost significantly more, 2 or 3 times as much as an Aero EPC9, which is already a little more expensive than your average AR9 build. And despite their high-speed recoil systems, they don't really have a great reputation for reliability. The problem with Aero Precision is that they won't sell you a complete gun. You can buy uppers and lowers from them, but you can't just buy a complete gun. I understand they do this for tax reasons. If they sell you a complete gun, they're charged a whole lot more in excise tax. If they sell you an upper and a lower, they get to keep a little bit more money in their pocket. That's totally fine. They also have a weird definition of the term complete upper. Their complete uppers do not contain a bolt carrier group or a charging handle. So you can still get a complete Aero EPC9, but you have to buy an upper, a lower, a bolt carrier group, and a charging handle, and assemble it all once you have the pieces in your possession. The other problem with that is that they don't actually sell bolt carrier groups. They're out of stock on their website. They've been out of stock for a very long time. I've had in-stock alerts that haven't come through in probably the last, 6 months to maybe 10 months. I can't find them on any third-party websites. I can't even find evidence on the internet of somebody successfully buying an Aero EPC9 bolt carrier group. And that gets into my conspiracy theory about the Aero EPC9. I'm not saying this is true, but it would be awfully convenient for them to be able to pawn off any reliability issues onto the end user. Basically saying, hey, you built that gun, not us. Oh, you also didn't even use our bolt carrier group. Well, if you use all of our parts, it works totally fine. I'm not saying that's the case. Maybe it's just a supply issue. They can't find anybody to make those bolt carrier groups for them anymore. But it is a little strange that all the other components of the EPC9 series keep showing up regularly on their website, but the bolt carrier groups are mysteriously absent. So in order to build an EPC9, you have to source a different third-party bolt carrier group. I went with a KVP, Cow Valley Precision, because that's the bolt carrier group that was working pretty well for me in my own AR9 build. So I just got another one of those and dropped it in here. There are a ton of different AR9 bolts on the market, and all of them look a little bit different. They have different geometry, they have different weights in them, so they actually weigh a different amount, which is extremely critical when we're talking about a direct blowback system. They also have either a Colt pattern magazine cut, which means that they'll feed from a Colt style double stack double feed magazine, or their Glock style, they'll feed from a Glock single feed magazine, or their hybrid. So 3 different patterns, numerous different weights and cuts and styles, different styles of ejector, external or internal style of ejector, or extractor, excuse me. So it is a little bit frustrating to try to source a bolt, and again, you just have no real guarantees that what you're getting is actually going to work. This gun, however, has been working flawlessly for me with the KVP bolt. I also understand that the first generation of the EPC9 had some reliability and toothing issues, and they retooled it a little bit specifically in the barrel to improve reliability. This one has the Gen 2 style of barrel, so perhaps that explains why I've been able to run this thing with no issues, using factory Glock mags, Magpul Glock mags, and even shooting a sparing amount of hollow point ammunition. But this is a functional gun, despite the fact that it's only about, 70% Aero Precision. You got to give a lot of credit to the bolt carrier group because it's doing so much of the work. So the Aero EPC is their enhanced pistol carbine. I assume I just made that up, but it sounds about right. And it's basically a Glock magazine fed AR9 style lower with a proprietary or semi-proprietary upper that includes its own last round bolt hold open system. If you're using Colt mags, it's a lot easier to get a last round bolt hold open into the lower itself, such as with my PSA Colt mag AR9 lower that I've been using. With a Glock mag, it's a little bit more difficult. That's why they have this sort of bizarre cantilever system up here. This is a last round bolt hold open built into their upper receiver. So if you're using a third party upper on here, you cannot expect to have last round bolt hold open. These are theoretically available in 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson, although the 40 Smith & Wesson version does not exist. They also announced a 10mm version, I think like 2 years ago, and that one also doesn't exist. So it's just this, the Aero EPC9 with an aftermarket bolt carrier group installed. This one is the 5.5-inch barrel version. I got this one because I thought it'd be cool to have an incredibly compact gun. I mean, this thing is like narrower than my shoulders when it's all collapsed down. Still, not a very fantastic PDW, if you remember all the arguments that we have about that with Mr. Brassfax. The way that barrel lengths are measured with AR9s is a little bit different than with AR-15s. The ATF says that the way you measure a barrel is from the bolt face to the end of the muzzle threads, essentially. So the bolt face on an AR9 actually starts a little bit farther back. In an AR-15, the bolt head goes into the receiver extension and then locks up in the locking lugs there. So it actually, the barrel starts a little bit farther forward in the barrel extension. In an AR9, it starts way at the back of the barrel extension. So this is a 5.5-inch barrel with a, I believe, Aero's Atlas 4.8-inch handguard, and it actually just barely clears. So part of the flash hider as well as the crush washer is actually underneath the handguard. So the barrel lengths are a little bit off. If you are trying to build one of these yourself, you got to kind of mix and match the length of barrel with the length of handguard. And if you're used to building AR-15s, it's not going to make any sense immediately. The controls of the EPC9 are pretty fantastic. It's very much standard AR-15, takes standard AR-15 triggers, safeties, and all that. It has its own special extended magazine release in order to work with Glock magazines, but it's in a perfect position. It's very easy to hit, and it's also nice and stiff, so it doesn't seem to actuate randomly on its own. The way that their telescoped or cantilevered bolt hold open system works still interacts with the traditional ping pong paddle, so it's exactly where you expect it to be. You can get the uppers either in the standard configuration like this one or as their enhanced configuration. The Aero enhanced uppers have the machined in barrel nut, which allows you to very quickly attach their enhanced style handguards. That is pretty cool. Those are extremely rigid handguards and they're very easy to install, but because of the way they attach, they tend to be pretty girthy. This is their standard upper, and it has the Atlas R1 rail on there, which is a pretty nice little rail. These tend to be a little bit heavy relative to their length for whatever reason, but no, that's not really the end of the world. We're certainly not expecting to mount a whole bunch of accessories onto this thing anyway, because it's so short there's barely even room for my hand on there. The muzzle device is actually not the one that came on this upper. Originally it just had an A2 birdcage style 9mm flash hider. I swapped it out for a VG6 9mm Gamma. This is the newest version of the Gamma, which is quite significantly truncated. The old one was very similar to the 5.56 muzzle brakes, but the new 9mm one is a little bit redesigned, much shorter, quite like that. So we actually shaved, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch off the muzzle by switching to this slightly shorter muzzle brake. Also, we get a little bit more of a braking effect, which is nice because 9mm blowback ARs recoil way more than you want them to. The choice of Glock mags, I know, is extremely controversial. A lot of people like Colt mags. Those people are all wrong. The only reason they like Colt mags is because they look cool and they like the way that they stick out of the gun in a straight line. And then they make a whole bunch of other completely nonsensical arguments to try to distract you from the fact that they're going entirely off of aesthetics. For example, people will say, I don't know, man, you can't really feed quickly out of a double stack single feed magazine. And then, I don't know, I guess you can just link them to that video James Reeves did where he did a whole shitload of mag dumps out of a Glock 18. It works just fine. Also, the difficulty in loading Glock magazines versus loading double stack, double feed Colt magazines, I don't see it, man. Honestly, I don't. The other problem, I guess, with that is that Colt double stack, double feed magazines like to bind up really easily, so loading them is a chore, even if it takes technically a little bit less pressure. Glock mags are the superior option because you already have a whole shitload of these. They're cheap, they work really well, they're lightweight, high capacity for the size. There's really no reason not to use Glock magazines. The magazine well is beveled for easy insertion, and it works extremely well. These don't have dust covers or forward assists. AR9s do not have forward assists because there's no notches on the bolt to make that possible. There also really is no in or out of battery with AR9s. I mean, it just sort of smooshes up against the barrel extension and you hope for the best. And dust covers, I don't know. You can basically build an AR9 upper and any standard AR-15 upper and then you'll have a dust cover, but a lot of the specifically pistol caliber uppers have enlarged ejection ports and they don't have their own redesigned dust cover. How important that is, I don't know. This is not a gun meant to be out in the dust. This is meant to be in perhaps a backpack or by a bedside. To finish out the gun, we've got an SB Tactical SBA3 brace, primary arms SLX 1X Cyclops with the 9mm Gemini reticle. It's a 1X prism sight, and the Streamlight TLR RM1. These are basically rail mount optimized versions of their pistol lights, so they're designed to be mounted on a rail and activated directly from a switch on the body of the light, but they perform essentially identically to their pistol lights. So the RM1 basically performs the same as a TLR7. It's even got the same light head with the rotating bezel. Extremely nice feature. Just the form factor of this in general is nice because it doesn't hang off to either side of the gun. You can activate it without any sort of additional switch, and because it's got this rotating bezel, we can safe the light for transport or storage, so it's not going to accidentally turn on, drain the battery, or overheat, melt, and catch fire. A quick quarter turn, and we have it back on. The reason I'm using an ACSS SLX 1X Gemini 9mm microprism Cyclops thing, probably said Cyclops at least 3 times in that sentence, is because this thing is an optics eater. This thing killed a Holosun HS403R in a fairly low number of rounds. I think it's because the recoil cycle of a blowback AR9 is extremely sharp and the recoiling mass is incredibly high. Direct blowback 9mm tend to have a very sharp recoil impulse, and they also have a very high recoiling mass. That's because there's nothing keeping the system locked except for the weight of the bolt, the weight of the buffer, and a little bit of pressure from the spring. When you're tuning an AR9 for reliability, you want to hit a certain weight target in the recoiling mass. So this is I think about a 15-ounce bolt carrier group and a 7.7 ounce extended 9mm buffer, which is the one that Aero puts in all of their EPC9 builds. The extended buffer is so that there's less travel of the bolt. Because this is an AR-15 length of action, the bolt is a little bit shorter than an AR-15 bolt, and if it travels all the way to the rear, that leaves a gap in the upper receiver where shell casings can fall in and jam up the action. If you don't find some way to take up that extra space in the action, then the bolt carrier group is going to be slamming really hard into the bolt catch every time you run empty, and that can break those parts in short order. Aero Precision also uses a 308 recoil spring instead of a normal AR-15 recoil spring in this design. That has quite a lot more pressure, which doesn't really resist the rearward travel of the bolt and the buffer very much, but it does give it a lot of extra energy when pushing forward to reliably chamber that round. Whether or not that's a good thing is, I was going to say it's up for debate, but I don't think it's up for debate. I think it's widely considered to be a bad thing. Because essentially you're just trying to cram the bullet into the chamber extra hard to get around any sort of other feeding issues. Okay, got a magazine full of a bunch of reject cast off HST 124 grain plus Ps. Gonna see if the EPC9 with its improved feed cone geometry will feed hollow points. I want to say that's relatively drama-free, but there's some crap accumulating on the bottom of the feed cone, so it might just be ramming them in so hard that it doesn't really care about the geometry. That can make the gun generally more reliable, but can also cause other problems if you're slamming the bullets really hard into the sides of the chamber wall. You might have some bullets set back, or you might just be destroying your gun for no real benefit. If the bullet is lined up properly with the chamber, you shouldn't need that extra spring pressure. I believe that's also the source of the issues with the original version of the EPC9. They had a traditional AR9 style feeding cone on the barrel, which is very shallow. It was never intended to feed hollow point ammunition. The Gen 2 has a much deeper, steeper hoodoo feed cone that allows it to theoretically feed all types of ammunition a little more smoothly, including hollow points. I did run a couple magazines of Federal HST and SIG V Crown through this just to see if it would actually feed hollow points, and it does seem to feed them no issue. Aero Precision uses Ballistic Advantage barrels in all of their guns. I don't know if they own BA or if they're basically just the same company, but the Ballistic Advantage 9mm barrels that you can buy direct from Ballistic Advantage are differentiated between AR9 style and EPC style. I don't think there's actually any difference in terms of what kind of guns they will work in, but the EPC ones have that improved feed cone geometry. So if you're building one of these yourself, make sure you get the one with the improved feed cone. And if you're trying to build some other, mongrel parts build piece of shit AR9, you might consider getting one of those EPC barrels because the improved feed cone could potentially save you a little bit of headache down the road. So how does this thing shoot? It shoots like crap. Like basically all straight blowback 9mm. This thing is jumpy. The recoil is sharp. but at least it's an AR9 platform, so the recoil is directly in line and it's still relatively controllable. You can also throw a muzzle brake on there for just the tiniest little bit of added benefit. And this gun is ergonomically extremely nice. All the controls work perfectly, fall to hand exactly as you'd like with an AR. Easy to reload, easy to manipulate, very easy to shoot. As far as suppressing direct blowback guns go, it's not exactly a pleasant operation. I'm still waiting on my Yankee Hill R9. I don't think I'll ever get it at this point. But also, I don't think it would even work on this gun because of the way that the barrel threads are slightly countersunk underneath the handguard, and the handguard geometry of the Atlas rails is extremely thin. So, when I eventually do get my R9, I don't think I'll be able to even use it on this regardless, unless I change the barrel out for something else. So I typically would not recommend the genre of 1X prism optics to anybody unless they suffered from severe, debilitating astigmatism. The reason that I got this one is because I figured it would probably hold up to recoil better than a very inexpensive Holosun. And so far that seems to be the case. This thing works reasonably well. I would, of course, greatly prefer a red dot. It would weigh less. It would actually function properly as a red dot because no matter what anybody on the internet has ever told you, 1X prism sights don't work like red dots. This is definitely the best 1X prism that you can get right now. The illumination is very impressive. The reticle shape works very well illuminated or unilluminated. It also has automatic off and shake awake, so it will actually stay on for a long period of time without just killing itself. Primary Arms seems to be doing Trijicon better than Trijicon is these days. That being said, I would still prefer a real red dot on here. There are definitely red dots that will withstand the recoil impulse of an AR9. So do as I say, not as I do. So final thoughts, do I recommend the Aero EPC9? Really only if your heart is set on an AR9. If that's the case, then yeah, I think this is probably the best way to go. You could definitely build your own AR9 for cheaper than this, but it's probably going to have some weird reliability quirks, and by the time you troubleshoot them and replace the parts as needed, you might not actually save any money. This is also just a nicer gun in general, particularly the way the lower works, last shot bolt hold open, and just some of those little Aero creature comforts that I really appreciate. So yeah, for a blowback AR9, this is probably about as good as it gets. That's not necessarily an endorsement of the platform, but it is an endorsement of Aero's take on the platform, I guess. Specifically the Generation 2 with the improved feed cone geometry. I can't speak to the original, can't speak to the 10mm because it doesn't really exist, can't speak to the 40 Smith & Wesson because it doesn't really exist, and I can't speak to Aero's 9mm bolt carrier group because those definitely don't really exist. That being said, I do quite like this gun. This compact version of it is probably not the one that you would buy, if I had to take a guess. I think that 8-inch barrels still kind of the more appropriate barrel length because these are really not so compact as to be practical as a PDW. I mean, you can kind of hide it under a jacket, you can stick it into a backpack and everything, but having a skeletonized folding brace and a completely self-contained recoil system in the upper would obviously make for a better PDW. ARs are also relatively heavy. Of course, nothing's going to be as big and heavy as an MP5, one of the worst PDWs ever made from a civilian context, but that's okay. Look at me, so casual. Not up to anything, just standing out in the woods as you do, completely unarmed. Surprise, mother... Thank you guys for watching. Just as a fair warning, the AR9 content will not stop until morale improves. I actually have another iteration of my AR9 to test. As soon as I can get it working, I'll probably show that off to you. It's kind of an endless cycle. Every time I change something about the AR9 to make it work better, it starts working a little bit worse for a while, and then it improves. So we'll see if I can get it up and running the way that I'd like to. Anyway, if you'd like to support this show, there's a link in the video description to Subscribestar. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the Subscribestar, subscribe to the Discord channel, subscribe to National Geographic